Question number 2, Phil Twyford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Building and Housing. Does he stand by his statement on the National Construction Pipeline report on residential construction that in Auckland it equates to about 30,000 houses over the course of the 3 years?
Honourable Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, yes, and I presume the member is going to compare it to the target set for the Auckland Housing Accord, which was 39,000 sections. One is a measure of sections, the other is a measure of houses built.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Is the reason that the National Construction Pipeline report boosts the value of residential construction by a factor of 1.82 and the fact that he is reduced to counting empty sections to meet his Auckland Housing Accord targets because he's so depressed at the failure to achieve a housing boom that he feels he has to artificially inflate the numbers?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, the member is completely wrong about that. In fact, the report itself shows, or the Auckland Council report shows, that we're in for the most sustained construction activity for 40 years. That is the longest period of the highest rates of growth of construction, and that is because we have to catch up from all the damage done under the previous Labor government, where housing consenting slowed right down in Auckland, and that is what's forced up rents and house prices.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Supplementary.
Order. Order. Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
How does he explain that Labor consented over 30,000 houses a year a decade ago under the same regulatory settings that he now blames for the collapse of his own 6-year housing program, that consented only 7,300 houses in Auckland last year, 4 years after he declared the recession was over?
Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, the member is talking nonsense. The government set out to undo the problem created by Auckland City Council limiting the amount of land available for new growth.
Order.
Limiting the amount of land they had available for new growth, not for previous growth. Not for previous growth. The impact of that member's policies is that almost no lower value housing was consented in Auckland up until a couple of years ago, and that's the real problem we need to fix, and that is the access of lower income New Zealanders to housing they can afford in New Zealand's biggest city.
Supplementary, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question. Order.
That's right.
Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Is he aware that the head of Auckland Council's Housing Project Office confirmed this week that only 5 houses have been completed under his accord, only 18 are expected by the end of the year, and is he proud of this spectacular achievement when people are living in cars and garages and caravans in Auckland?
Honourable Bill English, either of those two supplementary questions.
Well, Mr Speaker, here we are aware of the report of the Auckland City Council on where the pipeline's up to. Bearing in mind special housing areas were put in place by agreement with the Auckland Council, so we couldn't go faster than the Auckland Council.
Order. I'm sorry to interrupt the member, but the level of barracking coming from the member who's asking the questions is unacceptable. I ask the Minister to get...
Speaker, the combined efforts of the Government and the Auckland Council dealing with a very tricky planning environment are that we are headed into the most sustained period of growth in house building that New Zealand has seen in 40 years. That will be of great assistance to New Zealanders who have found that under the previous Labor government, house prices doubled, their debt went way up and interest rates reached 10%. That certainly won't be happening on our watch.
Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Has he considered approaching TV3's The Block NZ for help to fix the Auckland housing crisis, given that they've built and completed more houses in 2 seasons than he's built in 1 year of his housing accords.
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, the houses are more than $1 million a piece, and I know that's the bit of the market Labor's interested in, but we're interested in what normal households can afford. And secondly, they were built on land that had already been made available. And we had to actually make 39,000 sections available that didn't previously exist. We're very proud of the fact that in the next 5 or 6 years, tens of thousands of new houses will be built in New Zealand that would not otherwise have occurred.
Order. Question number 3.